Gray Miller, a Libertarian candidate for Congress in District 18. Why are you running for this office?
You know, I wanted to give people an opportunity to have a third-party option. And right here in the 18th Congressional District, this will be the first time in 18 years, and probably even over 18 years, that people will have a choice, a real choice on this ballot for a third-party option for a congressman.
Which parts of Pennsylvania make up the 18th District?
It's southern Allegheny County, a portion of Washington County, and Greene County, a portion of Greene County, and then also a portion of Westmoreland County.
What do you think distinguishes this part of Pennsylvania from other parts of Pennsylvania?
Well, you know, in this part, it takes in a portion of Allegheny County, which is heavily populated, and a lot of the rural areas too, out to Westmoreland County. But what's really big in this industry, or in this county, or in this section, in this district, is the oil and gas industry. And so, you know, I'm actually in that industry myself. I'm an energy attorney, and I realize it's really vital to the region. A lot of people out east don't realize that the oil and gas industry has provided 300,000 jobs in Pennsylvania. It brings in over $1 billion in tax revenue per year. And then in terms of ancillary value, it provides, I think it was $44.4 billion to the state every year. So,
how does living in this district influence the concerns of voters?
You know, I think that they just want to make sure that they're going to have jobs, that Washington isn't doing anything to infringe any of their rights currently. And that's one of the reasons I'm running too, is a lot of people are upset by the partisan politics, a lot of the divisive politics that are taking place in Washington. So I'm coming in as a third-party option, as a way to bring both sides together and to give a voice to everyone, especially to those people who have never really had a voice.
Now, I want to make sure our viewers understand that this is a special election that you're running in. What were the circumstances that led up to this election?
Well, what happened was Congressman Tim Murphy, who was at that time one of the staunchest pro-life advocates in Congress, ended up having an affair. He got his mistress pregnant, and he asked her to have an abortion. Because of this, he had to resign, and so his seat remained vacant, which is why we had to have the special election. And so now we're having the special election taking place in March. Whoever wins the special election will carry out the rest of his term until November, and then we'll have to get elected again in November to keep the seat.
So Congressman Murphy was suddenly out, and how soon did you throw your hat into the ring after he announced his resignation?
Probably about maybe 2 months later. It was.
You had to give it 2 months of thought?
You know, the Libertarian Party just put together a caucus kind of at the last minute, and it was unanimous that they said, we want you to be our candidate. So I decided to do it, just to, you know, give people that third-party option that they really haven't seen before. In fact, for the past 2 election cycles, they've had one option on the ballot, and that was Tim Murphy. You know, so now it's nice that they'll be able to walk into an election booth and really have a real option.
So the special election that's about to take place, I just want to make sure our viewers understand, when is it going to take place, and why is it going to take place at this certain time? How is it decided on? Sometime in March, right?
Yeah, it's going to be March 13th. That's a Tuesday, and it really came down to Governor Wolf deciding the date. It was sort of, I guess, an arbitrary date went to him, and he's the one who made the decision to make it that day. Which is going to be interesting, because then whoever wins that election, if it is a Republican or Democrat, they have to win the primary, and then, like I said before, they have to win the general election in November to maintain the seat.
Right, and again, I want to make sure that our viewers aren't confused, because the primary is still going to be in May, and that's not to be confused with your special election.
Right.
Regardless of the outcome of the special election, what will you do come May as far as the primary is concerned for District 18?
Well, what's interesting about the Libertarian Party is because they're a minor party, we don't have primaries in Pennsylvania. So that would be one reason why people should vote for me, is because I can hit the ground running in March and be able to work on the issues of the district up until the November election, where the other 2 candidates won't have the ability to do that. As soon as they get elected, if they do get elected, they will have to campaign for the May primary and then still campaign after that to the November election.
So they have to enter into a campaign mode before you do, so you figure that's an advantage?
Right, I do think that's an advantage, yes.
And let's talk about the Libertarian Party in general. Why did you become a Libertarian?
You know, what I like about the Libertarian Party is if you take a look at the Republicans and the Democrats currently, they both are alike in the sense they're both authoritarian. They want government in your lives, in particular aspects of your lives, in different ways. So, for example, the Democrats are really about welfare and the Republicans are about warfare. You know, the Libertarian Party, what they want to do is get government out of both your private life and your economic life. So that's really what I'm all about. I want to go to people and say, hey, look, you know, we're adults here. We have to be able to make our own decisions and decide what's best for us. And it is not the government's place to decide what is in our best interest. That's a decision that we have to make.
Now, I found this very interesting. You took a quiz in college that revealed your political leanings. Was that the intention of the quiz, and how did it go?
Right. So I was at Syracuse University at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs, and our professor said, I want everyone to go and take this political compass quiz, you know. So before I had entered this class, I'd only thought about as left and right, you know, and I'm like, well, I'm not really a Republican and I'm not really a Democrat. And that's the thing about the Libertarian Party is that they really pull from the strongest aspects of both parties in the sense that they're fiscally conservative, but socially liberal too. So it's kind of a merging of the two. Well, I took this quiz and it turns out that I was a libertarian and I had never heard that word before college. And so it was kind of like I found my place by taking this quiz.
So before the quiz, you figured that you didn't fit into either major party, did
Right.
you?
Right, and I'd always go around saying, oh, I'm, you know, fiscally conservative, but socially liberal, and I just kept saying that to people. And it seems a lot of people actually share that same political value as what I do. And in fact, every election, I hear people say, you know, I'm just so frustrated. I wish I could find a candidate who is fiscally conservative but socially liberal. And now, for the first time in 18 years, they actually have someone they can vote for who is just that.
Now, Drew, it's a while ago since you took this quiz, obviously, but I'm very curious. What kinds of questions did they ask? Do you remember any specific questions?
You know, I don't remember really specific questions, but it's basically about government involvement. So, you know, they would say things like, should marijuana be legalized? What do you think about our interventionist wars overseas? You know, it's like questions like that, you know, in terms of how much government involvement we think we should have in our lives.
So you feel at this point that you really belong to the Libertarian Party. And again, just tell me one more time, what does the Libertarian Party offer that you can't find in either major party?
It offers the ability for people to really have a voice and express who they are at the exclusion of the government, you know. So we take a stance that...
Sounds like it takes more care of the individual. At least that's what I think I'm hearing.
Right. That's exactly right. It puts the emphasis on the individual and what the individual can do to make the world a better place, not what the government can do to make the world a better place.
So let's talk about your experience, your job resume for the most part.
Sure.
I understand you had a job with the Pennsylvania Senate. Tell us about that.
So as soon as I graduated from law school, I ended up working for the former majority whip of the Pennsylvania Senate, where I was helping constituents out on a daily basis. In fact, I was averaging about 1,000 constituent issues per year that I was able to help them resolve any issues that came to our office.
What kinds of issues came up? Just a couple examples.
You know, a lot of people would say like, well, I need to get unemployment benefits, or they would have just any issue you can think about where the government would need to get involved. I could help direct them through the government agencies to help resolve any problems that they might have.
So constituent concerns took up most or all of your time in those
I would
days?
say most of my time, but also what happened was this particular senator, and that was Senator Ori at the time, and she said, you know, she would have to do a lot of research on particular laws. So I was there doing research for laws. What was great is that I had a couple of opportunities to actually draft legislation or work on the drafting of legislation before it went to her council for the, you know, the final review. So it was a great experience.
Well, how about an example of the legislation you worked on? And what form was it in? By the time it hit your desk, what did you have to work with? What did you have to find out?
Well, basically, like one form of legislation I was working on was Jessica's Law. law, and at that time, it was talking about.
Did you say Jessica's Law?
Jessica's Law.
And what was
right.
that?
It was basically monitoring sex offenders. So here's the thing about that. I actually helped to draft that legislation, but I don't personally believe in that legislation. So it's weird. It was like I was drafting it, but it went against everything I believed personally. Just I don't think that we should be monitoring people after they got out of jail. But it was a good experience, though, just to see how it's done. And I can't remember the other piece of legislation that I helped.
Well, at this point in your life, you'd already figured out you were a libertarian, but you're working for Democrats.
Or Republicans.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, no.
You said Senator Ori, didn't you?
Right, yes, yeah. So yeah, I was working for the Republican
How did that
Party.
feel then? Was there any disconnect in your mind, political affiliation-wise?
There was a little bit, but I think what was more eye-opening was how much power the Republican Party had over all of the elected officials in Pennsylvania. And not only was it the Republican Party, but it was the Democratic Party too. And I think it's where we were getting into a lot of issues with people, these elected officials, and ending up going to jail was because the parties became too powerful. And that's even happening right now in Washington. You're seeing that the power is being taken away from the people, and it's getting placed on the parties themselves. It's interesting to note that George Washington warned us of this very thing 212 years ago in his final address to Congress. And he basically said, I have some concerns about this party system that we've created, and that if we allow these parties to get too powerful, what they will do is they will actually undermine and usurp the power that we've created to give to the people, and it will basically undermine everything that we have worked so hard to create. And here we are at the threshold of Washington's premonition.
Now, the experience you had in Pennsylvania Senate, how do you figure that makes you a good, viable candidate?
That's the thing that I think sets me apart from the two other candidates. So you take, for example, Connor Lamb. Yes, he has a legal background also. I think he has a respect of the Constitution, but he doesn't have that legislative experience that I had. And you take a look at Rick Saccone, and yes, he's a state rep and he has that legislative experience, but the problem with him is that I don't think he understands or respects the Constitution, because at one point he tried to make 2012 the year of the Holy Bible, which shows me that he doesn't comprehend the separation of church and state. So that's where those are my strongest suits. The thing that sets me apart from these two candidates is that I have both the legal background, the respect of the Constitution, and also that legislative background too.
So let's find out where you stand on the issues.
Sure.
And where would you start? What tops your list as far as your concerns if you win this office?
One of my big concerns right now is in Pennsylvania, we passed medical marijuana legislation. And the problem with that is that if you try to go and purchase a handgun, you can't purchase a handgun while you're using marijuana, because they ask you that on the ATF form. So what we're doing is it's actually infringing upon people's Second Amendment rights. As a way to resolve that, I'd want to legalize marijuana on a federal level for recreational purposes.
Are we still, not medical marijuana?
Just
all marijuana?
Yeah, all marijuana for recreational purposes, yeah. So that's definitely what sets me apart from the other candidates. I don't think either one of them want to do that. But if we do that, there was a Business Insider article that said that by 2025, legalization of marijuana for recreational purposes will bring in $132 billion in tax revenue per year and provide for 1.1 million jobs in the industry.
So you think that this legalizing marijuana for recreational purposes is a major concern of voters in Pennsylvania?
I think that it is when it affects your Second Amendment rights, especially in the 18th district. And I think it's like that, in really every district except for those surrounding Allegheny County and maybe Philadelphia counties. And that's about it. But, in Pennsylvania, guns are important to us here. We're hunters here. We want to protect our families. So we can't allow anything to infringe upon our Second Amendment rights. So I think that when people think of it in that regard, it will be important to them.
Well, let's take one step back from recreational marijuana back to medical marijuana. Now, of course, that's legal in Pennsylvania. And what about the federal government, though? Is there any kind of disconnect? Can the federal government go after someone in Pennsylvania for using medical marijuana, is what I'm trying to say?
Right, yeah, and the federal government can, and I think that would be the only way to resolve the issue, is to create a law that would legalize medical marijuana for recreational purposes. And I know that people want to focus on the medical marijuana, but they've legalized it for recreational purposes in Colorado, and it's not like we've seen a spike in crime. So I think it really has the same effects as alcohol. It's at that same level. And I think when it comes to marijuana, marijuana is dangerous because it's illegal. It's not illegal because it's dangerous. And I think people need to recognize that.
Often candidates come here and say they want to reduce government spending. If you're elected, how would you do it?
Well, what we have to do is take a look at where are we spending our money on, and is it appropriate? So I take a look at things like the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. That cost us over $2 trillion so far, and I can't help but think, like, what could we have done with $2 trillion in this country? And I don't know that we're getting a return on that money that we're spending. We're still in a bad place. We still have enemies overseas that want to destroy us. I don't think that our presence there is really helping at all. I think that it would be better to just really close down all of the overseas military bases, bring the troops home for good, and then cut all foreign aid leaving our country and going to other countries. I think what we need to do is focus on our country right now and get us in a good spot before we go to help out other countries.
Now, I understand from your website you favor something called a national sales tax. Explain.
Right. So that is the fair tax, and I'm against the government taking your hard-earned money that you've worked for in the terms of an income tax. And I think the better way to do it would be to have this fair tax, where it be a consumption tax. So you go to the register, you'd make a purchase, and then what you would do is you pay a federal tax
on top of
that,
your state sales tax.
Right, yes. But the trade-off is you get to keep almost 100% of your paycheck. What would have gone to the federal government is now going into your bank account. And people say, well, won't this disproportionately affect people who are lower income? Well, no, because they would get a prebate, and what that is it would be a check that would be mailed to people who are below the the income or the poverty level. So each month they would get that check to help them out with the taxes that they would be making on purchases. But if you think about it, this allows people to decide when they want to pay taxes. It also would help to reduce the loopholes that a lot of the wealthy business people are using to not pay taxes. President Trump has not released his tax returns yet. And I think one of the reasons that he has not done so is it will reveal that he has not paid any taxes because he's been able to use these loopholes and these write-offs. So now, if we implemented the fair tax, whenever you buy a jet, for example, that costs like $30 or $40 million, he'd have to pay at least $1 million in federal taxes on that, and there'd be no way to get around it. You couldn't be able to write that off like you could now.
What else would you like to work on, Drew, if you make it to Washington?
I'm really concerned about the opioid epidemic, as everyone else is. And I think what people need to realize is that addiction is not a crime. And the opioid epidemic is really a mental health issue, not a criminal issue. And I want to implement a drug policy like Portugal has. Now, what Portugal did was they decriminalized all drugs. So it'd be like marijuana, cocaine, heroin, whatever it was decriminalized. It doesn't mean that it was legalized, but if you got caught using drugs, shooting yourself up, what would happen was, instead of going to jail and having that criminal record for the rest of your life, they would send you to a treatment facility where you can learn to get better, and they'd help to get you clean and back out and become a productive member of society. Since Portugal has done this, they've seen a drop in HIV rates, they've seen a drop in overall crime, they've seen a drop in drug abuse, drug addiction, and deaths caused by overdoses from drugs. So I think if it worked there, it can definitely work in this country.
Well, we know that state government here in Pennsylvania has passed some laws to fight opioid addiction. And how has the federal government treated this issue so far in your mind?
I think what happens is they need to decriminalize it, because what can happen is if someone gets caught with these drugs on them, they'll end up going to jail. They won't, get sent to a treatment facility, most likely. And I think that's wrong. I think what we have to do is address it as a mental health issue. So I think that's the big difference.
Let's talk about Pennsylvania's energy portfolio and what kind of agenda you'd like to put forward in that respect?
Sure. I just want to make sure that we don't affect the oil and gas industry right now. That's really helping Pennsylvania. You know, a large part of the budget is always based on the revenue from the oil and gas industry. So it really be in our best interest not to try to limit that. I know that there's a lot of talk within Congress, especially from the Democrats, that they want to try to create bills to limit the oil and gas drilling. I think that that would just be really detrimental, not just to our economy nationwide, but especially here in Pennsylvania.
Sometimes you hear the president talking about reviving the coal industry in Pennsylvania. Can that happen?
You know, I think so, but I don't think he really understands Western Pennsylvania, because even a lot of coal companies have moved away from coal and have focused really more on the oil and gas industry. You know, you don't really see coal being used. It's not as prevalent as it used to be, for example, back in like the 70s and 80s. You know, oil and gas is the new industry here in Pennsylvania.
I was looking at your website, and I know you have concerns about surveillance of American citizens, and I thought that was interesting.
Right, yeah, you know, and that's the thing that really upset me with a lot of these so-called, you know, liberal Democrats in Congress, is that when they voted to approve these new FISA provisions, they were essentially allowing the government to spy on the American people without a search warrant, you know, contrary to what the Fourth Amendment requires. And so I'm absolutely against any type of government surveillance, you know, on individuals without a search warrant.
Let's talk about campaigning. How are you going about it? Are you getting out on the campaign trail and meeting voters? If so, what are they saying to you?
You know, I have almost been talking exclusively to just high school and college students, because for two reasons. One, they're the most receptive to my message. And secondly, I want to energize them about this election. You know, I think when people talk about young voters, they're like, oh, they don't care about they don't care about politics. They don't go out and vote in the numbers that senior citizens do. And really, what it comes down to is we've never given them a reason to vote. You know, so I think the fact that they, you know, see a young face out there with this new ideas and someone who's actually going and speaking directly to them. I've been to so many classrooms recently, and I think they really value the fact I'm coming to reach out to them to say, like, I want your vote. And so that's why I've been talking exclusively to them. And I think I have the young vote tied up. I think we're going to see a lot of really young voters in this next election. That's really exciting to know that I'm finally, you know, bringing them into the electoral process.
So it sounds like you haven't had any political forums with your opponents yet, or have you?
No, you know, I really want to try and have a debate with them. And I've been told that Rick Saccone is just not interested in having a debate. When I went to go speak to Ringgold High School, they told me, they said, like, Connor Lamb was booked the same day, and they said, oh, Connor Lamb told us that if you're going to be here, he's not coming. And I'm like, okay, so it's weird. We've all kind of kept separate, and I've wanted to kind of bring us together just so that the voters can hear from all of us, like, where we stand on the issues.
You haven't met face to face, have you?
No, not yet, but I want to, you know, and I don't think we're going to see a debate. As much as I want to see it, I don't think we're going to see it. The reason for that is because I think there are a lot of questions that Connor Lamb can't answer, and I think there are a lot of questions that Rick Saccone must answer. You know, and I think that's what's stopping them from having a debate.
Well, examples. What kinds of questions do you think they're avoiding answering?
So, well, for example, with Rick Saccone, it has recently come out, there are allegations that he was involved in torturing, like literally torturing human beings over in Abu Ghraib in Iraq. And also, and I think also there's an allegation he was doing that in Guantanamo Bay too, you know. So that's come out. You know, he talks about being this Christian, but I don't know that you can necessarily be a Christian and torture human beings. You know, so there's kind of a disconnect there, and that's something that the voters need to know. And I have not seen yet one political attack ad talking about these allegations. I think it's something he has to address. I know he's written books about it, you know, in support of waterboarding, these enhanced interrogation techniques. But the fact that he was actually doing it and torturing human beings, I think would be an issue for a lot of people in this district.
Now, what about Connor Lamb, your other opponent?
Yeah, I just think that, like, there's a lot that he doesn't know in terms of the legislative process. And it seems like the party has been feeding him what to say. I've kind of gotten that impression. You know, the fact that, like, he has to mention that, you know, he still shoots guns on his commercials. You know, they're like, we need you to appeal to the voters. The fact that he has come out and said that he is personally pro-life, but that he believes Roe v. Wade is the law of the land. it seems a bit disingenuous to me, honestly. And that's the other thing. I'm the only candidate that has come out and said, I've always been pro-choice, you know, and always will be pro-choice. And to my friends who are pro-life, you know, I say to them, like, look, banning abortion will not stop abortion. The best way to limit abortion is what I want to do, and that is provide high-quality sex education at an early age, and then also provide birth control and make it readily available to anyone who needs it. And I think if we do those two things together, we'll see a drop in the total amount of unwanted pregnancies and abortions taking place throughout the country. So it'll get to that, you know, that end result that you want without having to actually ban abortion, which is something that will probably never happen anyway, no matter how hard you want to fight for it.
Well, let's circle back to Congressional District 18, the district
Sure.
you're running for in this special election. How's employment looking in that district, and what kinds of jobs are there? What other kind of jobs would you like to see?
You know, employment, I think I've generally seen that it's up in that district. So, and I've mentioned the oil and gas industry again. And oil and gas drilling is going on, and I know this because I've personally worked on abstracts in these particular counties, but it's going on in southern Allegheny County, it's going on in Washington County, in Greene County, and in Westmoreland County. It's taking place all across the 18th Congressional District. Here's another thing. Those jobs in the oil and gas industry, the average salary is $107,000 per year. And I have personally met people who are working in these industries, and a lot of these are very difficult jobs, mind you, but they really just had a high school education. They had no formal education really beyond high school, and they were making over $100,000 a year, like in these jobs on the oil and gas fields.
Drew, we only have about a minute left, so
Sure.
why not tell our viewers why they should vote for you in the special election on March 13th?
You know, I think this is an opportunity to really have a choice and make a difference. If you vote for Democrats or Republicans on March 13th, on March 14th, we go on as business as usual. Imagine what a powerful message will be sent to Washington if on March 14th they say, for the first time ever, a Libertarian was elected to Congress.
Drew Gray Miller, Libertarian candidate for Congress in District 18. We're out of time. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much.